Hi, everybody. My name is Anand Shankar. I'm going to keep this real brief. I'm the director for the Tata Management Training Center, and which is the learning arm of the Tata Group. So welcome to this. This is, we organize these events called Learning Latitudes, and these are a series of webinars we try and do as regularly as possible. But typically, we try and do it every Friday from 4 to 5. And the reason why we do this is threefold. One, we want all the Tata folks, the employees, everybody to try and take a step back for an hour and listen to someone from outside the Tata world who has a point of view and who typically has something unique to say and say it in their own voice. And we try and arrange speakers across eclectic topics, right? I mean, it doesn't always have to be an illustrious person like we have today, who's a prolific writer, a fantastic author, and I've enjoyed reading 2 of her books, and more about that from Chandana. But so it doesn't always have to be a celebrity like this, but we look for topics that are going to be making us think. Right. So one is the awareness and the access to such individuals. 2 is to get our employees to think and reflect and hopefully take something away as personal learning experience. And the 3rd, of course, is to continue to be in the traffic, if you will, of this knowledge exchange. So with that intention, we organize this every Friday. And we are really delighted that so many of you could dial in today to listen to our esteemed speaker. Chandana Sethi is my colleague. She runs programs for us, but she also is typically the marketing face of TMTC. I will now hand you all over to Chandana to take us through the next hour. So thank you once again for joining. Over to Chandana.
Thank you, Anand. Welcome once again, everybody, to this session. I'm requesting my colleague Sanjay. Sanjay, if you could please scroll to the next slide. We'd just like to share a couple of pieces of guidance with you. One is that you will find that our IT team has muted all of us by default, which you will appreciate keeps background disruptions to a minimum in the session. There will be time at the end of the session for Q&A with Ms. Koral Dasgupta. And you can share your questions in the chat window or in the Q&A window over here. And after Koral has finished her address today, she will then, of course, make time to respond to your questions. The other thing we'd like to ask you to think about as you go through this session is treat this like any other learning session, because that's the spirit in which we have brought this to you. So you may want to think about what are your top 3 takeaways from this session. Who would you really like to share them with? Because one of the good ways to make sure we learn something is to share that learning with other people. And also, what is it that you learn from here that you may be able to apply? So that's another interesting dimension to keep in mind. With that, let me move on to introducing our speaker. Very pleased to present to you Ms. Koral Dasgupta, who's an entrepreneur, an educator, a painter, and of course, as Anand mentioned, she's an author as well, who has published a very eclectic range of books, including fiction as well as non-fiction. What's noteworthy about Koral's books is that you'll find them not just on Amazon, but also in the libraries of universities like Harvard, Columbia, University of Wales, and Duke University, among others. One of the works that she is well known for is the Sita series of books. It's been published by Pan Macmillan. And what this book really does is it provides a perspective on women's leadership with reference to 5 legendary women of ancient India. Wearing her educator's hat, Koral also conducts learning programs and critical thinking workshops for educational institutions as well as companies. And what she does in those workshops is that Koral uses literature to inspire social engagement and behavior change, with the ultimate goal really of promoting diversity and inclusion. And for this rich body of work that Koral does and her authorship, which offers very unique and important new perspectives. Koral has also been listed under the Women of Wonder series published by Outlook Business Magazine in September 2019. What Koral will do today is that taking some examples from stories from Indian tradition that we've all grown up with, Koral will help us think more deeply about how those stories shape our worldview and they influence how we relate to people around us, especially people of the female gender. She'll also talk to us about what her understanding is from having studied our legends very deeply. What is it that makes women's leadership distinctive? And more fundamentally, the often overlooked fact that there is real leadership in the way that women in our legends have approached the world around them. So let me not take any more time from what I think will be a very fascinating session today, as I said earlier. And Koral, I'm sure we have a very curious audience here who'd love to hear what you have to share. So over to you now.
Thank you so much, Channa, and thank you, Anand, for your kind words. And I'm very privileged to be spending time with so many business leaders from different companies under Tata Group. And it's very, very, it's a great opportunity for me to be sharing my insights with you. And towards the end of the session, I really look forward to hear from you how my thoughts translate to yours. And I believe that together we make a story. So as an author, I have always felt, and it's not just about my feelings, it's about what I have experienced. And I think everybody, all of us would agree that it is not just, stories are never one-way communication. It is always a two-way communication where the author or the storyteller is doing only half the job and the people who are hearing that story are completing with their perception, with their interpretation of the story. So the story that I have to say might have one meaning attached to it, but the story that everybody hears and what they feel and how they react to it drives home a more comprehensive picture. And this is what will be the crux of my session to this evening, because what I'm going to tell you is not just a story, but also various eras of hearing, which has made the stories what they are. And I will also point out to you what we didn't hear, but we should have. Now, you see, story is a very powerful knowledge development tool, which we probably all agree to, because stories actually have, they present to you an idea. Ram is a good boy. Sita is a good girl. So when we identify a story like this, Ram is a good boy and Sita is a good girl, there is a shared belief system. You and I have together believed that Ram is a good boy, Sita is a good girl. So Ram does all the right things, Sita does all the right things. So whatever Ram and Sita does becomes our culture because it is preferred. The society, the people around us, in domestic life, in professional life, such values, such attributes are preferred, and so they become our culture. And we have a shared belief system, which means that we both have agreed that Ram is a good boy, Sita is a good girl. So we are not necessarily telling anybody that you shouldn't speak lies. We are saying that Ram is a good boy and he doesn't speak lies. So in the office, someone says that Sita is a good girl. She never comes late to office. So instead of telling that directly, that this is what is expected of you and this is the idea that you are supposed to follow, there are certain directives. There are certain stories, the cultural, which sets up the cultural paradigm of a company, of a house, of a state, of a country, and even beyond. So these kind of stories, not these kind of stories, actually any kind of story, they bring our decision, certain decisions that we know are right, but we might find a lot of resistance while following it from that logic-based, brain-driven system, it is brought, slided on to the more emotional, heartfelt space. So we relate to the story. We all believe in the story. We identify with the characters. And so we follow the characters. We try to become like them. He is good, so be like him. And that is something that we have done all our lives, where all of us have grown up hearing that we have to be like so-and-so, we have to behave like so-and-so, we have to return results like so-and-so. We have icons, we have ideals, and we tend to follow them. And those icons and ideals, if you see in our personal lives, we have always been told the stories of our ancestors, the stories of a successful person in the house, the stories of the best boy in school, the stories of the best person in the company. So these stories have told us what is expected from us. Now, I spent some time in explaining stories because the first stories, you see, story is very, very impactful, and it is a very important tool in guiding our personal and social behavior. And the first stories as children, if I may tell you this, that the first stories that we hear, or as a child, when he or she hears the first stories, a child is a believer. So whatever he or she hears, they want to believe. They ask 10 million questions, but that is not because they want to challenge. That is because for them life is a mystery and they want to believe. And the stories that are told in their childhood, in each of our childhood, they are the primary governing factor of the values that we imbibe, the culture that gets pasted into our brain as the right things to do. And that tells us what our culture, our country, our identity prefers. Having said this, you see, in this country, India, or any Indian for that matter, irrespective of the religion, some of the first stories that we hear are from the Indian mythology. And mythology, we treat mythology very casually, simply because those stories have a religious connotation. And we want to develop our pride of origin, we want to develop our imagination. So the stories are told to us from a particular perspective. Now, when we hear the stories, mythology is not as simple. Mythology is deeply metaphorical and extremely philosophical. Now, obviously, when a child hears the stories, the philosophy and metaphor is not for him to understand. They just hear the story. So, what is the first story that a child hears? Especially in India or in Indian households, wherever they are settled in the world, the first story that they hear is, there was a king and he had 3 queens. The very genesis from which Ramayana starts, King Dashrath, 3 queens. There was a king, a great king, a kind king, and he had 3 queens. Very subconsciously, as I said in the beginning, that story is a two-way communication. There is a conscious presence where the story we just hear and react, and there is a subconscious presence where the story enters and stays. It doesn't go away immediately after hearing. So what does the subconscious trap? The subconscious traps 1 king, 3 queens, which means men are entitled to 3x. Women are entitled to x by 3. And so entitlement of the man is 3 times that of the woman. So whatever the woman gets, the man should get 2.5 times of what a woman gets. And that includes everything. Now, when the stories are told in this way, everything that we do gets conditioned on that path. Women deserve less, men deserve more. Now, the stories are starting from here and they are entering into different directions. You see, the way the stories are told to us in our childhood, we hear of great brave personalities like Bhishma, like Karna, like Arjun, like Krishna, who were very brave and they fought great wars and they accumulated wealth. In their stories of bravery, the way the stories are told to us, the way we hear the stories, in these stories of great bravery, the women feature somewhere peripherally, once again giving us the clue that women are not important. They are not leadership material. They are not capable of leadership. They are not capable of solving problems. So women appear peripherally, and in the stories of the kings and leaders and brave warriors, the women characters appear as peripheral characters, and these are the characters who did something foolish, and because of them great wars happened. They took a foolish decision. One of them just wanted the golden deer, and that created one huge level of problem. Another one laughed and she was molested, and the second war happened. So in these stories, women feature as non-leadership materials, and they feature as a problem. Because of them, war happened. Because of their foolishness, something bad happened. People died. So every time there is a problem, there has to be a solution. So if the woman is the problem, what is the solution? Correct the woman. So from there comes a series of events. Women should not go out late in the night. They should be back home. If possible, they should cover themselves. They should dress up in a particular way. They should talk in a particular way. They should sit in a particular way. They should behave in a particular way. There were a series of guidelines put forward because women are a problem, and the solution is to correct the women. Every time there is a problem, you must correct it, right? So correct the women. Simple logic. This not only led to our perception and conditioning against women as a whole, but the repercussions were far more. It also gave rise to a term called womanly, like a woman, aurat jaisi, aurat and aurat jaisi, woman and womanly. So, terms like worse than a woman, be a man, हाथ में चूड़ियां पहन रखी है, all these kinds of things came forward if a man does something which seems like a woman. So all those boys don't cry and men will be men, all these things stem from here, where there is a perception being injected very, very consciously into the system, where men's behavior should be a particular type and women limit themselves, thinking that their culture and their tradition prefers them to be obedient, prefers them to be soft-spoken, prefers them to be more submissive and in control of their women. I would also like to point out that there are all the jokes that are circulated in WhatsApp or social media, which are derogatory and sexist towards women, somewhere stemmed from there. And if you look at it and if you think about it, all the galis, the abusive words that we use, which language kuch bhi ho, whichever be the language, they always, 99% of the galis that we use are rooted in something that has to do with the woman. You can think of any, and you will find that 99% of the times, the galis that you are using, be it at your home, be it with your friends, be it in the boardroom, they have something to do with the woman. Now, in every power cluster, people learn from whoever is on top. So every time people feel stronger by using these terminologies, the younger generation feels that there is great power in showing off your might. And these are the certain things that show that you are a powerful person, and it gets repeated. And there is an internal, we are feeding ourselves constantly with these kind of things, which say that women are derogatory, women are not capable, women are lesser. Now, women's journey, if we look at it, it had started from a very simple assumption. This division of labor, where men went out and women stayed at home, it was a very, very convenience-based distribution of labor, simply because anatomically it made sense. It was not merit-based. It was just anatomy-based, that it makes sense because men are physically a particular type. It makes sense that they go out and take that pressure, and women stay at home and take control of the entire home front, because anatomically it conveniences them. Nothing to do with merit, nothing to do with who can do what. But what happened was, when men went out, their cluster kept increasing. They met more people. A power bank was set up. Women being at home, their world remained smaller because they were home. But was this totally work against them? Probably not. What happened was, when you are going out and meeting more people and having a bigger world, of course, men formed the power groups and they started propagating, they started establishing their might and power, telling women that this is what you cannot do, and not something that was divided on the basis of convenience. They start making jokes, they start saying that these are the things that you are not capable of doing. You are not eligible, you are not a leader. Having said that, if you see, women at home were managing everything. And unlike men who were going out and working, everything that belonged to the home was the woman's own. So she didn't have boxes, she didn't have her departments boxed out. She didn't belong to the HR, she didn't belong to the finance, she didn't belong to the marketing, she didn't belong to the production. Every department was for her to make sure that everything was running properly. So she was basically taking care of people management, project management, process management, and financial management. All three she was taking care of at one time. We didn't pay attention to these things because there was no appraisal. There was no trade union like it happened to be in the olden days, which would point out that they need rewards. There was nobody to take note, since there was not a wider network which will set up heads everywhere, an HR head who will appraise. So everything stayed in the house. But what happened was, the woman's capability to multitasking expanded, and their overlook, they were capable of looking at a far broader perspective than a man. They were capable of looking at 10 different things at the same time, and without necessarily taking sides. They could be far more inclusive. They could be far more result oriented. They could be far more solution oriented, and that too in less time. Because in the house, in the office, if there is a breakdown somewhere, there are 10 other departments which will come and take care of that situation. But in a house, the breakdown can't sustain. So she has to be quick. So women develop that skill where they are capable of managing far more at a lesser time. And with fair level of inclusion and fairness towards everybody that she is catering to. So obviously her intervention is far more inclusive. When you take this little bit of thing, at least I did, when I was reading the story of Ahalya, I felt that whatever the woman does, whether it is her fault or not, she will be punished if something wrong happens to her. When I read Draupadi's story, I figured that she could be insulted in an open court for no fault of hers, and people would ostracize her decade after decade and use her as a butt of their joke. So I grew up thinking that our religion, our culture, the Indian way of thinking prefers timid, obedient women who must follow decorum and be very obedient and be in control of the men. As a grown-up, when I re-looked into the stories, because these stories were very, very dear to me, the characters I was very, very fascinated with. So when I looked again, I figured that there was a gold mine here. The stories from mythology are immensely impactful in the way we look at women, in the way we treat women, in the way relationships build up between gender. These stories are extremely influential in laying the foundation, and the stories that are said are far more inclusive and far more open and far more progressive compared to the way the stories had been told to us. You see, when one section of the society believes itself to be superior, it will obviously exercise that kind of pressure on the other section of the society and make it believe that they are superior. So the stories that we have been told across various patriarchal eras are in a way celebrating men and talking about women in a much compromising way, and telling us again and again, decade after decade, that being a woman is like a sin, is like you have done something wrong to be born as a woman in this country. But if you look at the stories from Indian mythology, they are very, very interesting. And what I figured is that these stories here, as I said right in the beginning, that they are deep into metaphor and very, very powerfully philosophical. Now, the stories of men and women are varied, and the problems that were tackled by the men and women are gender agnostic. And this is a very, very interesting point that I pull forward to you. But before that, let me tell you, if you don't know, that we have always been introduced to women like Kaikeyi as the one who brought intense problems in her house because she had used her boons to her personal advantage. But Kaikeyi let me tell you, was a warrior princess, and she was the charioteer of Dashrath in a war, and she saved his life, which entitled her to the two boons that she used to her advantage later. So charioteer is actually interpreted as the Margdarshak, which is the one who shows the road. And when you look at a story like Kaikeyi, with this kind of an insight, you figure that actually you never know. Kaikeyi may have influenced Rama's going to exile, because if that wouldn't have happened, the entire Ramayana wouldn't have happened. So you never know. Kaikeyi may have felt that Rama is still not ready for the throne, because if she had a problem with Rama, she could have employed many other means to put Rama out of her son's way, which she didn't. She did that at the last moment. Now, let me bring you to some of the stories that I have figured, and I will take generous examples from Kunti, which is my last publication. And as I said, that the problems faced by the mythological icons are gender agnostic. The problems faced by Karna, for example, can be faced by a man and woman alike. And similarly, the problems faced by a woman could appear, and it appears constantly without us being conscious about it. It appears constantly in the lives of men and women alike. So let me take you through certain highlights in Kunti's story. One of them being, let me start from the space where Kunti receives a boon from Durvasa. Sage Durvasa was said to be an unhappy sage who would be he was infamous for his anger, and he would be cursing anybody and everybody if he was not happy with whatever was brought before him. But Kunti, he was very happy. You will find here that many a times two people don't match. They don't match even though there is no apparent problem between the two. Both are good in their own ways. But in the professional space, in the friendship space, though two people are nice people in their own way, they cannot gel together. What happens is, the disruption that happens is, often the skills don't match. The way I want to do work, someone else wants to do the work in a very different way. And my way of doing work doesn't match that person's way of doing work, or my interest doesn't match that person's interest. So there is a skill mismatch, there is an interest mismatch, and that results into a perceived discomfort between two people. And that is what was happening with Durvasa and others, because of which the sage was constantly getting angry. In Kunti's case, Kunti was giving him all kinds of services, which the sage accepted, but he was not happy enough to give a boon to Kunti. It was only when, at one particular moment, when he was exposed to Kunti's scholarship, which is her educational prowess, her scholarly interest, that is when the sage actually engaged with her. So, and after he engaged with her, when they found that common ground on which they both stand, and they stand as equal, not as someone more powerful and someone less powerful, when they both stood as equal, that is when the real exchange started. And Durvasa gives Kunti a boon. It has often, as a child, come to me that what is that boon which allows Kunti to call the gods from the universe to herself to stand before her. And a boon comes out to me, to us, which probably all of us know, that Kunti can call upon any deva, and the deva would leave a child with him. The story progresses into Kunti early in the morning, looking at Surya, finding that deity very beautiful, and calling upon Surya to by using the boon. Now, Durvasa, before giving the boon, had very specifically told Kunti that don't make wrong use of the boon, otherwise you will suffer. But curiosity kills. Everybody has curiosity. So Kunti used it. Now, the question that came to me was that, okay, Kunti used the boon, and the boon mandated her to have the deva come before her and give her a child. What was Surya's problem? Why didn't Surya back out? He could have backed out, right? He could see that the girl was not interested. The girl was curious, and so she had used the boon. And so he could have backed out. So what I realize is the boon not only mandates Kunti, but it mandates the deva that she has called with an equal and opposite compulsion to fulfill the need of that boon. So that boon is basically a contract that mandates two parties to come together and work together under certain terms and conditions. These terms and conditions, once signed, were to be fulfilled, and Surya could not back out. He didn't have the power. That power only Kunti had. So they both had to give birth to Karna. Kunti was not prepared for Karna. Kunti didn't want Karna. She was unprepared. She didn't expect it. It was a mistake. It was a miscalculation, howsoever you call it, whatever you call it. But then nothing doing. The child is born. But Kunti didn't want to take responsibility. I remember in Maharashtra, a friend of mine who happened to be the CEO in Maharashtra Circle had once told me this story about himself, that, you know, Koral, he was from Airtel, and they were coming up with a lot of value-added services. And he said that, you know, I had launched this. I had not launched, but it was totally my idea. I had said it, and I had totally done the rough work. But then I was much junior, and I couldn't leave the project. So I had to let go of the project. But then someone else, and the project was stalled for a while because I was not ready. And then someone else came and said that, Arey, why is this one? I mean, he just discovered, and he said that, why, this is a great idea. Why not take it ahead? So that person took it ahead. And the product became big. It was hugely successful. And now I have, much later, when I grew in the organization, I launched my own value-added service. And now these two are competing. They're competitors. And I figured that this is a typical Karna Arjun story. Now, I'll take this story forward. Karna is born. Kunti has disowned Karna, which means she is not ready. And so she has given it away to other heads, and she is not in a position. She gets married in the kingdom of Hastinapur. And there is a very interesting story unfolding. One is, she finds that Pandu is a very pale and weak character. And there is Bhishma, who is a very strong character. Now, Kunti understands, Kunti finds out, she basically starts getting into the dark corners of the Hastinapur palace to figure out the history and the stories of the palace. And she figures how Pandu was born. She figures that Pandu's father was dead. So Pandu's mother had to make love against her wishes to a sage that she was very, very scared of, and she did not want that. And forcibly, she had to engage with that person and get a child out of force, not out of love. And Pandu has grown up knowing that, with that kind of underconfidence, knowing that he was not a product of love, knowing that he was born with a lot of disgust that had gone into his mother's system. And that makes him pale and important. And simultaneously, Kunti also realizes that Pandu may not be capable of birthing children. And Bhishma, who was instrumental in getting the sage to Pandu's mother to give birth to the children and take the generation ahead, might repeat that again with her. She understood, she made an environmental study and exactly understood that what happened with her mother-in-law would again repeat with her. History might repeat itself. So what she did was, she developed her own team. She knew that she had her boon and it had to be used appropriately. This time, she would not fail by misusing the contract. She would have to succeed. And she went ahead, formed her own team, went away to the forest, took Pandu in confidence, and solved the problem that Pandu was suffering from. And let me bring this to your notice, that Pandu and Pandu's children were born under the same situation. The mother was there, the father was not capable of giving birth. So external people were brought in to give birth to their children. But Pandu himself and Pandu's children had very different upbringing, and the result, Pandu and his children were very different in character, in attitude, in the way they conducted themselves, in their confidence for themselves. This brings me, and okay, let me also point this out to you, that when Kunti must have told Pandu that she is capable of using this boon, which will give her children, it is normal for anybody to ask whether she had used the boon in the past and whether she has a child from that boon. Right? It's normal curiosity, it's normal for a person to ask, which means Pandu must have asked Kunti, and Kunti must have given him the answer. Absolute transparency between team members in order to achieve a common goal. This brings me to the next question that appeared in my mind, that who mothered Pandu's children? And the answer is very fascinating. The answer is both Kunti and Pandu mothered the children. The concept of motherhood, we all treat in a very, very myopic way. We just look at motherhood from the concept of the body. We think of the umbilical cord, we think of the mother's protruding figure, and that is all that we think of when we think of motherhood. Motherhood is basically an attitude. We have so many business leaders attending this. Everything that you have taken responsibility of, we all are mothering our responsibilities. We all are mothering our verticals, our products, our people who are working under us. Motherhood is a far more vast concept than just a woman's body. Each of us are mothering something or the other, just like Pandu and Kunti together mothered Pandu's children. So all of them became, none of them had suffered the kind of problems that Pandu had suffered when he was young. The questions that appear out of dual fatherhood did not appear in case of the Pandu. Now, motherhood relates to your ownership, how much you own something, and the responsibility you take because you own something and you believe that that part of the world is yours, dependent upon you. So whatever you do, you are nurturing it, you are building it up, they are all looking at you. So you are all that it has. Which means, and there is nothing bigger than what I'm going to say now, that there is nothing bigger than the ambition of a mother. The mother is the most ambitious creature in the entire world. You see, coming back to Kunti, and I'll come back to this part. Coming back to Kunti, Kunti's children, the 5 children that were born because of Kunti, were called Pandu's children. This included Madri's children also. Kunti's sons were called Kaunta. Only Arjun, who is suspected to be Kunti's favorite, is called Partha. Kunti's maiden name, the name that she was born with, was Pritha. Later, her father had given Kunti to her cousin, to his cousin called Kunti Bhoja, and that is where Pritha was renamed as Kunti. So her original identity, the name that she had got post-birth, she had given only to one son, which is Arjun. And so if I may explain ambition in this way, that Kunti was that ambitious mother who, being a princess of earth, wanted a child from the king of heaven. And all of us, when we develop that ownership as a mother, we become that ambitious. We want the best of collaborations. We want the best of systems to come forward. We want the quickest of things to work for us. And we want the best of products to be created. And we want nothing less than the best that would perform and win over the world and become a change maker. Kunti's vision was Arjun, and that was her level of ambition. Motherhood, there's nothing more ambitious than motherhood. I will end this with a very brief story, which will probably put into perspective a few things that I have been trying to draw home with this session. I have a 9-year-old child, and when he was about 4 or 5, there was a vaccination drive in a school, which was compulsory. So before he went to school, I just sat him down and told him that, you know, the injection looks very scary. So if you can get over or just overcome the visual, if you can overcome the visual scare that it produces, by seeing the big syringe, you will feel very scared. But if you can overcome that thing, you will feel that it doesn't hurt at all. You will not even realize that something pricked and it took off. So just try to overcome that and you will find that you are absolutely at peace. You will not have any problem. So he said, fine, I'll try. So he went to school and he came back. And when he came back, I asked him that, how was it? He said, you were right. I just closed my eyes, or he said that I looked away. So I didn't even see the syringe. And it went in and went out. I don't know what happened, but they say that I was drunk. So I asked that, so you didn't cry? He said, no, I didn't cry. And then immediately he adds that girls are cowards, they cried. Now you would probably realize that a 4-year-old cannot come back home with this kind of a statement. Girls are cowards, they cried. Someone has put that into his brain. Girls are cowards, they cried. So again, I and my husband sat him down and we spoke to him and we discussed that, why do you think you didn't cry? So he was like, you told me that you prepared me for it and it worked. So we asked him that, am I a girl or a boy? So I'm a girl. And so cowards are not those who cry. Cowards are those who see someone or anticipate someone to cry and don't do anything about it. So, in every era, there will be some people, men or women, who will say girls are cowards, they cried. And there will always be some others who will stand up and put that story into perspective, could be man or a woman, who will explain the story and put the story to perspective and refute the fact that girls are cowards, they cried. I am trying, I hope, whatever little I have tried to, I hope I have made a little bit of sense in whatever I said. And I hope it makes sense to all of you. Thank you so much.
Koral, thank you very much. I think, I don't know if you're able to see the chat, but you would see very many, very appreciative comments in the way that you've elucidated this. And I think for me personally, there are two things that will stay with me. One, of course, and I think that's something that one of the participants also has mentioned here, that motherhood is really an attitude and it's gender agnostic, actually, that attitude. And the other, I think the way you summarized it to say that really it's the responsibility for each of us to retell some of these stories, to change those mindsets, really. With that, I'm going to now open it over to the participants to ask any questions that you have. I do see a steady stream of very, very appreciative comments. It's, as I said, resonated a lot with people. Participants, please, over to you if you'd like to ask a question. We have a few more minutes with Koral.
Thank you so much, all of you. I had kept this chat off because...
Okay, no problem, no problem. So I'm just scrolling through quickly to see if I may have mentioned, if I may have missed any questions as you were speaking, but I don't think so. I do see a lot of reflections that I think the session has sort of
I think there
triggered.
is one which is very different question from Dipali. How do you maintain your calm in all situations?
Yes,
is that for me?
I suppose so, yes.
Okay. I am not a calm person. I am a completely, a very hyper person. But writing and thinking is my meditation. So when I am into those phases, it calms me down. But it's not about, I'm not a calm person at all. I'm always in a hurry to finish something and go on to the next, because it's just a passion to do more.
Right. Koral, I do see one question which I think I'm going to put to you, but in the meanwhile, I also want to ask the participants to please share your feedback. My colleague Sanjay will be sharing a feedback link in the chat window, so please do give us your feedback on the session. So here's the question, Koral, which is that, do you think this is something which you see only in India, or is this something that you see across the globe? Because the comment here is that somehow these views and approaches seem to have become more rampant in India post the colonization rule that we underwent as a country. And so the question is, I'm not sure if this is just in India, or do you see this across the globe?
It is across the globe. All kinds of myth, be it a Greek mythology or Roman mythology, all kinds of myth are said in a way. Of course, they are very deep in philosophy. They are about wars and all kinds of things. But the kind of wars and actually the way we interpret war, we see that war is something that is fought with a sword where people are beheaded. War happens every day. You are managing the crisis management in your office is war situation. We say war situation, but we don't internalize it as war for that matter. So it is across the globe. We all have suffered. And in India, we suffer more because you see the mythological stories have been translated in many vernacular languages that India has. So the pressure comes from many different provinces, many different languages, many different school of thoughts. So it has been reiterated. The patriarchal narrative has been reiterated again and again and again. So we have sat down under that pressure, getting slaps from n number of directions and thinking that probably this is right. It is not.
I will share the chat comments with you while there aren't more questions. You will see that the session has prompted a lot of reflections. I think there are some evident truths in what you spoke about. So people have reflected on that. There is a question on whether you have any book recommendations to really delve a little deeper. Many people have asked for more time with you, and we'll certainly, try and plan that as well. But any reading recommendations on this?
Okay, I am writing right now the Sati series. Sati series is a retelling of Panchkanya, Ahalya, Kunti, Draupadi, Mandodari, and Tara. And you probably know that in India, we attach a lot of words and thoughts on women's purity, which relates to the body. And Sati series talks about the Panchkanya from Indian mythology, and Panchkanya are translated as 5 virgins, Kanya, virgin. And all these women had partners beyond their husbands. And mythology basically says that it is your intention that matters. But mythology treats everything from a far broader and bigger perspective. Anything that is myopic or smaller in dimension doesn't make much sense in mythology. So the body is only a temporary home of your soul as long as you are on the earth for a limited period of time. After that, the universe is your home for the soul. So the Sati series is relooking into this women's purity aspect, which is talking about the first person's narrative, the first person narrative of Ahalya, Kunti, Draupadi, Mandodari, and Tara, and discovering their stories from their own narration. And there is a lot that I am discovering, and my readers, thankfully, are enjoying. I hope you will too if you choose to read them.
Wonderful. Certainly, they're on my reading list. There is another last question, Koral. We have a minute. If I may request you to take that on, what is the perspective you have on equality from these stories that you studied? What is the view on equality?
Equality is one kind of gender equality, for that matter, is one kind of activism that we have gone into simply because that is the need of the hour. After many years of patriarchal pressure, we are increasingly realizing that many things that have been fed to us, that have been told to us, are not right. And it has been, we have been conditioned into believing certain things. In mythological texts, there is nothing called equality because they are not looking at men and women as 2 different sectors. There, everybody has space. Everybody has equal rights to live. And this is not about just men and women. It is about animals. It is about plants. Everybody has their space and everybody has their right to live. And there is also that Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest, that also applies. So it is a much bigger and wonderful concept where you are being said that Krishna, for example, if I may point out, Krishna is the Antaratma, right? He is the super being inside every one of us. We lose touch with Krishna because we concentrate on everything other than who we actually are. there is a Freudian theory which says that half the things that we want in life are actually not the things that we want. कुछ पड़ोसी ने ले लिया है, कुछ friend ने ले लिया है. We have heard about those and now we want those. But then वो हमें चाहिए नहीं था. We never wanted it. So we constantly keep losing touch with Krishna. Krishna को हमने एक, we have made Krishna a man. And hell has broken loose. When the moment we make Krishna a man, there is a man who protects a woman when she is being molested in the court. And so without a man, a woman can sustain. In mythology, there was no need to do that. They have looked at it from a far more natural platform. You see, all the gods and goddesses are nature. They are manifestations of nature. आप कोई सा भी ले लो. They are all manifestations of nature. So far more eternal, far more powerful. And mythology believes that nature is far more powerful than humans. So, वहाँ पे there is Purusha and Prakriti, which are the aspects of masculinity and femininity in your character, attitude. I, being a woman, might have many masculine characters in me. The attitude might be that I might be very aggressive. That doesn't make me any less of a woman, and vice versa. We took that entire thing in a very myopic way and thought that we are talking about macho men and submissive women. And वहाँ पे सब बिगड़ गए.
It's fascinating as it continues to be. We're a little past the time that we had budgeted with you and with the participants. So regrettably, I think from my perspective, and I imagine all the people who are still on the call, let's call the session to a close. I'm sure, we must find another opportunity to hear from you, as many have said in the chat. But thank you so much for your time today. And thank you so much to everybody who logged in. Many of you have said that you found this inspiring and insightful, and I hope that that's true for the rest of you as well. So share your feedback and do join us again next Friday. We have another great session coming up by another very thoughtful speaker on the subject of how to build resilience and, really come back from setbacks. That's again based on a very deeply personal story. I'm sure you will enjoy listening to that speaker too. So we'll see you back at the same time next week. But for now, wishing you all a great weekend. And on behalf of all of us, thank you once again, Koral.
Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you, Anand, for making this happen.